John Chapman sets up 3 stacks in front of him. He leaves one empty, puts a bullet in the second, and 2 bullets in the third. He proceeds to call out the names of his fallen comrades from the war, counting in this way to determine which stack he will name the last name on. Fade falls on the stack with 2 bullets, and he drinks whiskey from there. He then loads the bullets into the revolver's chamber. This time, the odds of Russian roulette are 1 in 3. Fortunately or unfortunately, the next attempt ends with just a quiet click of the trigger mechanism. During the day, Chapman goes to replenish his alcohol supplies when suddenly 2 robbers burst into the store. Fearless, he stands in their way and advises not to aim the gun at the stomach because such a shot will leave the victim alive. The hero takes hold of the barrel and suggests shooting himself in the chest or head. This provocation completely disorients the criminal and leaves him stunned. Chapman gets tired of waiting and knocks out one and then the other. Memories of the horrors of war he experienced flash through his mind. In the evening, flashbacks again prevent John from sleeping. He tries to switch to heavy workouts, but it doesn't work, and in a fit of rage, he punches the room. The next morning, while Chapman lies at home with a hangover, someone fiercely knocks on his door. It turns out to be his sister Cindy, who he forgot to pick up from the airport. Knowing her brother's condition, she is not surprised by this turn of events. The girl explains that she came for a couple of days for a friend's wedding, after which she will return to Brazil to continue charity work intrabelat areas played by crime. The brother worries about her, but it's evident that arguing is pointless. Cindy checks if her brother is taking the pills that help his psychological condition, only to find out that he replaced them with mint candies. The girl leaves, and after some time, she is found dying on the ocean shore by 2 Brazilian police officers, Catarina and Paulo. News of the brutal attack on an American citizen reaches the U.S. Embassy in Brazil, and then Chapman. He immediately flies to Rio de Janeiro to visit his sister in the hospital. Meanwhile, a detective named Tiago Santo, with his partner Carlo Bororo, visits the favelas to arrest several residents suspected of illegal arms smuggling. During the arrest, they are interrupted by Catarina and her partner, who were trying to gather information about the attack from local residents. The girl opposes Santo's actions outside his jurisdiction and harshly deals with the suspects. Santo, in response, tries to intimidate Catarina. The detective accuses her of being too lenient with the locals and of the crime spree in their area, which almost led to the death of a U.S. citizen. But a stone thrown from behind interrupts the detective's speech, and all participants in the conflict and its witnesses nervously grab their weapons, threatening to start shooting. Understanding that they are outnumbered, Santo lowers his weapon and suggests settling things fairly, challenging the strongest capoeira fighter among the locals. He chooses Bororo as his representative. The detective promises that if Bororo loses, his people will leave without arresting anyone. In the fight, the huge policeman faces no problems and easily knocks out his opponent, skillfully performing pirouettes and somersaults. Santo loudly declares that he and his people will return here whenever they want, and the locals bid him farewell with unfriendly looks. In Brazil, Chapman is met by the ambassador, who is also a veteran and his old acquaintance, Manny Ridley. They visit the hospital, where Chapman sees Cindy in a coma, and again, his mind is flooded with images of dead bodies that once shocked him during his service. Santo enters the room, introduced by Manny as the one responsible for investigating the case. The ambassador convinces Chapman to stay calm and let the detective handle all the work, stating that the favelas are not a place for tourism. Tiago takes the American to the crime scene. In the car, they share gloomy views on a world where children grow into new criminals, God is not merciful, and wars are fueled. John meets Catarina, but during the conversation, the veteran mistakes the sound of an old jalape's exhaust for a gunshot and grabs the gun hanging on Catarina's belt. Santo asks his colleague to keep an eye on the nervous guest. The woman gives him a tour of the favelas, explaining that drug cartels have been paying clinic and school workers' salaries for a long time, and the government has abandoned people in these areas. Therefore, people here cover for criminals. This is a big problem for Catarina, as any of her careless actions as a law enforcement representative could lead to many victims and disasters. In the hospital, during Cindy's visit, a seizure begins, and Chapman calls a nurse to check her vitals. It turns out someone tried to kill her again. A woman of Asian appearance, disguised as a doctor, disconnected life support devices. Demanding the police to stand guard in the ward, John finds a guy named Cook in the favelas, who might know something. On his neck, he sees a necklace that belonged to Cindy and demands answers. Cook and his friends start a fight, but they can't oppose the experienced Marine. Cook pulls out a knife, which John skillfully takes from him, now threatening the guy. However, he doesn't speak English, and the situation is saved by the arriving Catarina, who explains that Cindy worked with the boy's family, and his sister Maria also fell victim to local criminals. She disappeared without a trace. So, the necklace is a gift, a sign of friendship. Cook gives Chapman Cindy's notebook, but the hero notices that many pages are torn out. John studies his sister's notebook and finds the phone number of a photographer who recently worked with Cindy. He calls him and arranges a meeting at a cafe, where the man explains that the girl involved him in a series of photographs about the difficult fate of favela children. He believes that Cindy got into trouble because she intervened in the story of the disappearance of underage girls who worked at night. She also asked the photographer to secretly take pictures of her meeting with the informant. The man claims that he handed all the photos to Cindy. John hugs the man goodbye and steals the flash drive from his pocket. The photographer gets into his car, and a deafening explosion occurs, killing him and injuring passers-by. Chapman again experiences flashbacks when he suddenly notices a girl nearby who tried to kill his sister in the hospital. He chases her, and from around the corner, thugs in a black Jeep emerge with machine guns. Dodging bullets with difficulty, he takes the gun from a security guard, who turns out to be an innocent victim of the shooting, and wounds the attackers, making them flee. Soon after this, in Ridley's office, the Marine tells that the bandits had strange tattoos on their hands. Perhaps they were representatives of the Japanese diaspora. You see, the suspicious girl also had an Eastern appearance. On the flash drive, they also find photos of Cindy with a man near a nightclub where Manny and Chapman are taken. The man from the photo turns out to be a DJ, and John follows him to the restroom, where he takes his portfolio with documents and forces the smuggler to reveal the address of the client who might be involved in the attack. The next day, accompanied by Ridley, Chapman goes to hit a new target and visit. The place turns out to be a villa where the rich spend time with beautiful girls. And Santo and his team are preparing to raid drug dealers in the favelas. Tiago prays before starting the assault. They simply shoot many criminals without discrimination. John enters the mansion, where Asian girls immediately report his presence to a woman counting money on the second floor. She says she will deal with the problem herself, and there is no need to inform the boss, Haramont. The guard invites Chapman to go to the balcony, from where the hero notices that girls are being brought to the villa, among them Maria, the missing sister of Cook. At this time, he is attacked from behind, but he quickly removes the snake from his neck and knocks out the guard. John finds where the kidnapped children are being taken and hides from the crowd of Yakuza gangsters. The clearing of the favela continues. One of Santo's men also sees several Yakuza in black suits leading children to their car and stops them. The detective praises his subordinate when suddenly he takes out his gun and kills him, releasing the Yakuza. The corrupt detective notifies his employer. The girl replies that the detective will receive his money later at the port. Then she calls boss Haramont, reporting that the American is interfering with their business and needs to be eliminated. Tiago will handle this problem. At the boss's reception, there is that guy from the club, Lima. For allowing the documents to fall into Chapman's hands, he is executed with a single stroke of a samurai sword. Chapman continues, and Haramont's men spot him. With the help of a portfolio and his fists, he fends off 5 of them at once, but Santo and Bororo suddenly interrupt him. They point their weapons at Chapman, demanding him to stop and show them the portfolio with documents. Katerina and her partner also arrive after hearing gunshots, preventing Tiago from carrying out his plan. Chapman leads the police to the room where the girls were held, but it turns out to be empty. He then shows documents proving the Yakuza's involvement in human trafficking, and he asks Tiago to hand over the portfolio to include it in the case materials. When John has already handed over the portfolio and is leaving, he suddenly realizes that he didn't mention Lima's name in the conversation, which means that Tiago is also involved in criminal activities. Marpe asks Katerina to go to the hospital to visit Cindy, and he himself goes after the detective and hides in his car. Katerina manages to arrive at the hospital a second before the killer commits irreparable harm and eliminates her. Santo arrives at the port, and John watches from a distance as the children are taken to a warehouse to be later transported to Japan. He calls Ridley and reports his grim findings. Ridley disapproves of Marpe's intention, who is not willing to wait for reinforcements. Using all his combat experience, Chapman evades pursuit and eliminates the thugs one by one, making his way further among containers and barrels. Thiago is also nearby, and in a shootout with him, John pushes a forklift, which runs over the corrupt detective, trapping his leg. However, Bororo saves him from death, grabbing Marpe's gun and fighting with him. John deflects attacks and strikes much more effectively without unnecessary acrobatics. Santo manages to get out from under the debris and tries to help Bororo, but is much weaker in hand-to-hand combat. Then Haramont intervenes, cutting off Marpe's hand with his sword. Chapman manages to evade the sword, but 3 opponents have already surrounded him. Santo attempts to stab the hero with a knife, but ultimately, the same knife ends up thrust into his partner's leg, while the detective is knocked out. In a final move, John tears off his cross and thrusts it into the area of the heart. The only one left is the Yakuza boss, with whom Chapman engages in a duel, armed with 2 iron pipes. When he fixes and directs the pipes and the sword at the enemy's neck, Paramount reveals a concealed blade in the handle and wounds the heroes in the abdomen. But John didn't want to provoke him further. He gathers strength into a fist and finishes off the Yakuza with powerful blows to the head. Bleeding Tyagu hands over the keys to his locker, where a list of everyone involved in crimes is kept: police, judges, even government members. The detective says that he's the only one of his kind who made it to 45. Dying, he admits to doing many things, but never harmed Cindy. At that moment, Paramount launches a final attack, and John shoots him several times. As Chapman leaves, he leaves the gun for Tiago so that he doesn't suffer. Ridley and the police arrive at the docks, and Chapman frees the children from captivity. As for Cindy, her life is not in danger, but her health has been seriously damaged. Ridley is ready to help pay for her treatment, on the condition that Chapman becomes a secret agent for the intelligence services. Manny didn't doubt the answer, so John was already given the code name, Falcon, his familiar call sign since his days in the Marine Corps.